Welcome, everyone. Welcome to United in Strengths, your character strengths community here. I'm Ryan Nemec, and here with Ruth Pierce, and we're with the VIA Institute on Character. We're here to remind ourselves to breathe at times of difficulty and at the great times as well in our lives. We're here to remember that we have 24 character strengths to turn to, and we're here to connect with people here, United in Strengths, but also to remember to connect outside of here. So before we get into today's topic, we thought we might start with a short story that relates to my experience with Larry King. So as many of you or most of you know, the legendary Larry King passed away this weekend. So he's known not only in the United States, but across the world as one of the great interviewers in the history of interviewing. Interviewed people from a number of different countries and media stars and movie stars and people that were kind of on the fringe to people that were really popular. And all in all, he had something like 50,000 interviews. And if you do the math on that over the decades of his life, he died in his early 90s. It's quite an amazing number over the decades, how many that means he did in a given year. And I was privileged and really humbled to be one of those 50,000 people last year that was interviewed by him. So kind of as a tribute to him, I wrote a blog post. We haven't launched it yet, but it'll launch on my Psychology Today post tomorrow, and we can let you know through the United in Strengths Facebook when I do that. So there's a full story of my experience with Larry in the interview, and a link to the interview if you've not seen it yet. But I thought I'd tell one snippet of a story from those experiences. So this is part of right from the beginning, an experience right in the beginning. So I was in the green room right before I was to go on. And of course, mind you, I had plenty of anxiety and nervousness about this experience. And I was going over last minute logistics with the producers in there in terms of, lighting and camera and the logistics that we're going to be doing, and that I'm not going to be engaged once I get on and once I get in the studio room. I'm not going to be doing any niceties with Larry King. I'm just going to be plunged right into the interview. As soon as I get in, he's going to start with a question. That's what he likes to do rather than a bunch of chit chat. And I knew there was 15 minutes to spare. So I had planned all along, well, I'm going to really engage in this time that I have right before I start with some mindful breathing, to really get centered and focused, not to take away the nervousness, because that's all but impossible, but to embrace it and to really be present to it, to be present to this, extraordinary for me experience. And also I was going to be engaging in strengths priming. And that's a strategy we've talked about here, which means to think about your own strengths before you do something difficult, before you engage, before you encounter that stressor. So I had everything all mapped out to do that. And I was just about to do that when suddenly another producer jumped into the green room and said, "We've got to get Ryan in there now." And the colleague of hers who had been talking with me and prepping me said, "Well, we still have 15 minutes, right?" And then this person says, "No, we need Ryan in now. Something has come up with Larry, and we need Ryan to get to the studio room now," which meant to jump off the green room link and then log into a different link. And then the person responded, "Oh, okay." And then I, without having any choice in the matter, said, "Okay, no problem. I'll head there now." So I began to log out and start the login process. Even though part of my mind is like, should I just shut my laptop down and just disengage with the whole thing? I'm not gonna even take part in it. It's too much. But that was just a fleeting thought of avoidance that lasted about a second. And I thought about all the negative consequences if I were to suddenly bow out like that. So in that second, I did a quick self-talk back to myself, and I started to keep going, getting ready. And then I suddenly realized there was a couple things that I had totally forgotten about, even though here I was using my prudent strength a lot, preparing everything, I had forgotten that my home phone, my landline, and yes, I still am one of those few people that has a landline in addition to cell phones, was just a couple feet. It's right here, right next to my computer. So if it goes off, and it does go off every once in a while with a telemarketer, then that's going to come up in this interview with Larry King, and how embarrassing that will be. And then I also thought, and wait a minute, I have a meditation timer, a mindfulness timer programmed on my computer to go off every hour. And now that I'm being brought in the interview early, that chime will go off in front of everybody after I've been asked a couple questions already. So here I am trying to kind of juggle that on top of the other stress. And I didn't get my strengths priming. I didn't get my mindfulness priming either. So I quickly thought, I've got to take care of these two things before I jump in. I know Larry King's waiting, but I've got to do it. So I quickly disabled my phone. Luckily, I was able to figure out how to disable the meditation app on the computer. I had never done it before, but luckily that was smooth. Logged into the new room and then dove in to the interview. Of course, doing last minute checks on hair and clothes and lighting and camera, and made sure my Pez dispensers were neatly organized behind me. Everything was ready and jumped in. And then from there, it was, my anxiety was still present throughout the experience, but I was able to really bring forth quite a bit of my character strengths on purpose during the interview, whether it was gratitude toward Larry, whether it was a sort of a social intelligence with how I answered the questions to not be too long-winded and too thorough with my answers, answering with honesty with the questions, not trying to overstate things, but also not understating them, and then most of all my hope strength, kind of fueling everything of bringing forth a positive impact and the whole purpose of the interview and so on. So I just wanted to share that little snippet, and that's sort of maybe a teaser to hopefully encourage you to watch the interview, watch other interviews that Larry King did in this program called Positive Voices, where he interviewed, maybe 20 different leaders in positive psychology and related fields, and lots of good insights and wisdom there. So again, Positive Voices is the nonprofit organization that led that, alongside with James Pawelski, who was Larry King's co-interviewer. James Pawelski is a scholar from the University of Pennsylvania and a thought leader in the field of positive psychology. So I could keep going on Larry King stuff, just my own excitement and sort of reliving some of that and trying to stay present in a difficult situation. But we have a topic today, and I think everyone here is maybe prepared for it. The topic is the character strength of spirituality, and thinking of it sort of a little bit of it as an introduction to this character strength, and also thinking of it as your character strength, wherever it falls in your profile from 1 to 24, your character strength of meaning and interconnection. So to set this up, well, first of all, as Ruth and I have talked about this and planned these sessions, this probably won't be the only time we're going to talk about this character strength. So think of this as part 1. No, part 2 is not next week or even next month, but we have actually planned for it I think it's maybe in 6 weeks or something. So there will be a part 2, maybe a part 3, maybe a part 4, but because there's a lot of interlocking parts here. So let's dive into here to part 1. So there's many ways to look at spirituality. And I'm sure if we interviewed every person on the call here and every person watching the recording, there would be that many different views of it and different angles and lenses. And my take and interest is always on the universal. What is the universal feature of this character strength? So when we talk about spirituality, we certainly can talk about it as a major domain of functioning, right? Just like our biological functioning, our physical functioning, our mental or psychological functioning, our emotional health, our social health, our cultural health, all these are different big categories. We can also think of our wider spiritual being, our spiritual sense of who we are in this world. And so certainly that's something we can get into, but that's quite broad. So we're going to narrow to the specific character strength called spirituality. And it's also useful to make a distinction right up front, is that there is an important distinction that's made and has been really drawn out maybe in the last 20 years in terms of spirituality thinkers and thought leaders and research, and that is the distinction between spirituality and religion. And certainly there's can be overlap, but there can be quite a big distinction between the two. So if we're talking about religion, or specifically religiousness, or a religious person, someone that follows any of the big five major world religions, or any of the non-big five world religions, that is someone who is following institutions. It's following a person-made experience of some kind, so made by thought leaders, authorities over time. And it's something that is embedded with particular dogma or beliefs that one could or should follow if one is part of that particular religion. There's often, as you know, particular practices and rituals all associated with that religion. And so a religious person would adhere to all those things I just mentioned. And of course, there's variations on how religious a person is, to being extremely religious to not. But that's distinct from spirituality, which is often thought of as a more personal experience, one's own personal relationship with something outside of oneself, or something deep, deep, deep within oneself. To think of it as tapping into that transcendent in life, connecting outside of ourselves, developing a personal relationship with that thing, or with that particular entity, or with that figure in history. Now, it's interesting, there can be people who are very religious, but not at all spiritual. And then you can have the reverse, people that are very spiritual, but not religious. So to give you examples of both of those, people that are very religious, but not spiritual, I spent many years counseling and conducting psychotherapy with priests and nuns and monks and ministers of all kinds, people in various religious orders, talking with various people from different religions and different faiths. And many of those people, when they came to me for help, they were quite religious. They're attending church or synagogue, mosque, regularly. They're partaking in the rituals and the practices, but weren't very spiritual in the sense of really tapping into something that's transcendent or sacred, of really trying to operationalize virtues, these via character strength virtues. So very religious and devout with that, but not so spiritual. And then you have the other side, people who are very spiritual, but not religious, which, by the way, has been the fastest growing faith community, if you will, in the United States, really since I've been tracking it, which is the early 2000s, so close to 20 years and maybe longer. And I forget what the numbers are, something like 25% of millennials in the millennial generation identify as spiritual but not religious. And that number seems to be growing for young people. Also, when I've talked to people in other nations, like predominantly Muslim countries, the younger people tend to fall, they might not say that they're spiritual but not religious, but certainly falling far more into identifying with spiritual elements of Islam, as opposed to following the exact principles and practices like people from older generations in those many Muslim-speaking countries. Now, again, I'm speaking in generalities. I'm not saying every person is this way or that way. Spirituality, again, coming back to the original thing I was saying, is very personal, very individualized, different for everybody. And of course, you can have people who are spiritual and religious. They follow a particular religion, whatever it is, and they're deeply spiritual beings. Now, how does all of this mesh with science? And there are a lot of people like me that are very interested in the bridging of spirituality and science. So in tracking this for a couple decades, there is a definition of spirituality that I think is very useful for all of us. And I, again, love it because it, in my opinion, is very universal. It cuts across whether you have no care at all about religion, or whether you're devoutly religious, or if you're an atheist, so which means to not believe in a particular God of any kind, or if you're agnostic, which means that you're kind of in this zone of not knowing. You just don't know, and you're not going to necessarily name something, and everything else in between. People that would see nature as their spirituality, and so on. So what is that scientific definition? And by the way, this definition is noted by 2/3 of spirituality scientists, which is extraordinary for something that is complex as spirituality. And you have a majority of people using a variation of this definition. That's a pretty big deal. So I think maybe I'll share it with you. So what it is it's the search for or the communing with the sacred in life. So the search for, the journey for that which is sacred in life for a particular person, or the communing with, the being present to the sacred in life. So you could see where this is immediately applicable across every single person. Because you could take an atheist who doesn't believe in particular religion, and you could ask that person who's atheist, well, what gives you a sense of meaning in life? What gives you that and meaning could be that piece that's sacred for them. You could turn to somebody who's devoutly religious, and they might say that, well, when I'm in prayer and I feel I'm in contemplation and really being present to God or to a higher power, that's sacred for me, they might say. Or somebody else might say, I feel the sacred when I'm in community and we're all singing in unison together. And I felt that before in spiritual communities, and it's very sacred. Or you could have somebody who has never gone into a mosque or a synagogue or a church or any religious institution, and they would say that sacred for me is when I go for a walk outside and I just connect with nature. I'm looking around, I'm seeing the blueness of the sky, and I'm caught in the wonder of all things. I'm caught in, gosh, how did this world come to be? How could something like this be created? And look at all the life around me, the trees, the leaves, the green, the blue, the rippling of the water, the wild animals, the other people I can see over there walking their dogs. This is just a part of something greater. I can't make total sense of it, but there's a connection here. There's an interconnection here. So you could think of it as a connection with immediately, or the interconnection of all beings, if you will. So that's the way to think about spirituality, or I should say a powerful way. That's an inclusive way for thinking about spirituality. Now, so we at VIA have we've not really used the word sacred, partly because Peterson and Seligman didn't use that word when they originally put the VIA classification forth. I think we've started to put it in some of our descriptions a little bit more because it's adhering to the science, and we want to always adhere to the science as best we can with these offerings. But we've thought forever, as long as VIA has existed, as spirituality is very much about different dimensions. So let me go through different dimensions. So there's the sense of meaning in life. There's a sense of finding purpose, one's own purpose or one's own calling in life. There's how one believes about the universe. It could be religious beliefs, it could be non-religious, more spiritual beliefs, but how one believes about the universe and thinks about the interconnectedness of things. But also it's very much about, another dimension is the expression of virtue, the expression of wisdom and courage and humanity and transcendence and temperance and justice. And it's also about those practices that help us connect with the sacred. That there's a dimension to life that's really beyond full human understanding. It's a big part of what spirituality is. So as to offer, a little bit more, examples on the sacred. I could think of sacred as sort of the forgiveness that's offered by a child, a humble moment between a leader and their subordinate. That could be a spiritual sacred moment. An awe-inspiring sunset, or being captivated by one leaf in your hand as you study it. It could be a profound experience you had during meditation or during a religious service. Or it can be the inspired observation of kindness of a stranger. and on and on. So many different possible examples here. So before I continue, I want to pause for a moment, and I want to invite us, I don't want us right in this moment to get into a big spiritual dialogue. I just want to invite everyone to think about what is sacred for you. And when you're tapping into the sacred, what is that for you? And please use the chat right now to offer some examples. And if I were to give a few more synonyms to sacred, it could be when you tap into the holy, when you tap into something that is particularly precious, when you tap into something that is of deep and profound meaning for you. Those are some different synonyms or ways that people sometimes think about the sacred. So I want to just invite us to just chat in the chat room, offer a couple examples of, or just one example of something that you find to be sacred. And you're welcome to share anything about how you tap into that particular sacred. That might be an interesting question for all of us to reflect on, is with whatever you put here in the chat, how do you tap into that? Or how might you tap into that more in your daily life? So we have some examples here. We have a bright pink sky during sunset, says Kathy. It's sacred for her. Nancy says music in nature, in my special place or places. Amy says a deep connection with fellow human beings and conversation. Pamela says walking in nature. Lisa says this beautiful planet that we share with so many other beings, including the minerals, and which supports this web of life. So really getting at that interconnectedness piece. Marla says my personal and me time, reflection time with myself. Iroslav says words can be sacred. Absolutely. And at VIA, we certainly care a lot about words and common language. So that would be powerful for you to think about what are the words that strike you when you feel that and when you touch the sacred. What is the words coming out of your mouth or out of somebody else's? Patricia says meditation and in nature. Alexa says flow and balance, awareness without judgment. Marilyn says the love and companionship of beloved cats. Maria says creating art. Doris says inner peace with ocean waves. Erin says framing thoughts to focus on peace, even in the midst of imperfection within situations. Joe says being in nature, walking and taking time to watch the sunsets, spending time with my young adult son, just even any of those moments is sacred for her. Being in nature, we have a common theme there. Intuition, connecting with God through imaginative contemplation. Nature, working with someone at a level of greatness. So I don't know if I can keep up with everything here, but we might want to, Ruth, make a little, what do we call it? Infographic of some kind with everything, a Wordle or something. And I got a thumbs up from Ruth, so thanks for that. And Jackie mentions a key word with all of this that I think, it's a word that always strikes me, whenever I think about spirituality and read from some of the spiritual masters, if you will. And it's a great word to describe it, and it's a humble way to describe it. And one of the words Jackie used here is mystery. And I think that gets at a wonderful dimension of what we're trying to talk about here, that we don't have all the answers when we, even though some people might think they do, and some people who espouse certain beliefs think that they do, but of course they don't. Nobody has all the answers to it, that there is this grander mystery within ourselves and just how we have come to be as human beings and all the complexities in our mind, in our bodies. There's far more we don't know than we do know. That's quite mysterious to me. But then the world. And it's amazing that the mystery can be as tiny as the smallest instance that we can come up with, which is a quark. Or it can be as complex as the infinite number of galaxies that are out there. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think that as big as the Milky Way galaxy is where we live, but there are millions, if not billions, of other galaxies. I mean, if this isn't mystery on the smallest of small levels and the biggest of big levels and everything in between, simply the mystery of human communication between two people that care about each other. I mean, there's so much mystery. and so much sacredness if we embrace that mystery. It's kind of a beautiful thing. Okay, so thank you for mentioning that. You know, something we didn't mention, I didn't see it in the chat, and I hadn't mentioned it yet. Can be kind of a convoluted topic, but I'll just mention it as sort of another dimension of all of this, is truth. And by truth, I mean truth with a capital T. You know, there's lowercase truth, which is being honest and truthful. That's a character strength. But uppercase T, or truth. You know, what are the common truths across the religions, across spiritual camps, across elements of spirituality? And so that's an important piece. And, you know, some people lay out that there's 7, or some people say there's 10. There's, you know, it's going to be different from who you ask. But that's another piece to all of this, is what are the main human truths out there, the truths about the universe out there? You know, one example might be what we've touched on, which is the interconnectedness of life might be a common truth, or the joint seeking of meaning in life might be another truth. And so we could certainly flush that out as its own session at some point. Okay, so before we move to a meditation and then our community sharing a little bit further, you know, I always want to make things even more practical. I like to think of myself as someone that talks in a practical way, but still, it's always useful, I know, to make things even more practical and very concrete, even though you all just did the work for me. Anybody here can just be, and hopefully you are, jotting down ideas in the chat room. And what could be more practical than what you all just noted? Because you had your own ideas, and then hopefully you jotted down 2 or 3 or 10 other ideas, and then putting more of those in your daily life, you know, very deliberately with a goal-setting attitude, you know, of making sure that you spend at least do one of those instances each day to tap into the sacred in life. Likely that will bring benefit on a well-being level for you, on a relational connectedness level for you, on a meaning in life level for you. Lots of benefits to that, just feeling a part of something greater as well. So that's one very, very practical thing that you all did the work for already. And then we can lay out 3 other ways I wanted to share. And again, this is something that there's tens of thousands of other ways, but let me just kind of 3. So one is a detailed, I'll call it a parts approach. So you could break down any of the different pieces of spirituality and pursue that. So what I mean by that is you could take any spiritual practice, any spiritual reading, whether that's scripture from a sacred religious text from any of the religions, or spiritual writings from a very wise figure, spirituality books, and so on. You could turn to other parts of spirituality, such as the rituals that each of the religions has, whether it's fasting, or whether it's certain prayers, or whether it's some other kind of ritual. Another part is community. So looking at the community piece, which is relevant across all beliefs, whether it's going to a church, going to a synagogue, going to a mosque, going to a Unitarian type of church, which is more non-denominational, going to a unity church, which is a spiritual but not religious church, going to an ethical society, going to a meditation group or meditation sangha, going to a spiritual book club, a spiritual movie night, going to mindfulness-based strengths practice. Some of you are in that. It could be a spiritual experience for a lot of people. Coming to these United in Strengths sessions can be seen as spiritual or sacred for many people, and Ruth and I have heard that. So that's a details approach where you take any of those things I just mentioned and you pursue one of them as a way to build your spirituality. Again, pursuing the practice, the ritual, the community, the reading. You can't do all of that at once, so you would pick one. So that's a parts approach. Which is great, and that will help people boost their spirituality. But then I like to think also of a whole approach. What would be a more holistic approach? And there's lots of ways to do this. I think one of the best ways, and especially because we're talking about something personal, is to try as best we can to articulate and understand our own spiritual quest. What is your spiritual quest? What is your spiritual journey? And you can't do it justice, I don't think, just by thinking about it, and just by thinking, oh, I kind of know that. I know my journey. I've talked about it with my spouse, my friends. It basically goes A, B, C, and that's kind of it. Or maybe I've only been an A the whole time. But if we really start to write things out, I'm always struck by what comes out when I start writing and putting pen to paper, and how much more I wasn't thinking about and wasn't even really aware of, and how meandering things are. So for me, I mean, I would love to tell my whole spiritual journey here, but I'd probably want to take a good hour to do it. But I would meander around from my roots in Catholicism. I was born and raised Catholic, and my questioning of things at a very early age, and then my journey to explore other sects of Christianity, and then in my movement when I went to New York and going to various Buddhist monasteries, and then pursuing and learning about other religions, and then exploring kind of less traditional Christian churches like Unitarians, and my pursuit of virtue, and my work with Via. I think these character strengths are very spiritual, and my work with mindfulness. So I'd have a very meandering, but there'd be so many layers and mini stories within that that are just so rich. And and that doesn't have to be any different than anybody listening here. We all have a rich spiritual journey in which we've sometimes embraced the mystery of life and sometimes not. Sometimes we've got more fundamentalist on ourselves and thought this is the way, this is the only way. Sometimes we've questioned our faith or our beliefs or our spirituality, and we've left it. And other times we've had great moments in community. We've had what I like to think of as mystical moments of interconnection or oneness experiences. We'll talk about that at some point in United in Strengths. So there's all these different pieces to our journeys, that our spiritual journey, that we can understand only by fully embracing the quest and really taking time to explore it and meditate on it and sit with it and write it out and talk it out with people. So that's the second piece. I talked about the parts approach for spirituality, and that's like the more holistic approach. Certainly takes a lot more time to do. And then I want to offer one more, and that's the very concretely the pathway to the sacred. So in addition to what you all noted, I like to think of one fairly straightforward path to spirituality is the path of mindfulness through simplicity. So being much more mindful where we're doing one thing at a time. We're setting aside our busyness and our autopilot and all of our busy projects, and we are literally walking just to walk. And when's the last time we've done that? We're always walking to get from A to B, or we're walking because we have to exercise, or we're walking because we have to walk our dog. But instead, just walk to walk. In other words, to just be present with all of your senses as your body moves. And that would be walking just to walk. And that is simplifying things. It's mindful walking. And that, for many people, will be a spiritual experience, a sacred experience. Now, sacred experiences, by the way, come in great gradations. So you can have, again, that oneness with the universe sacred experience, deep mystical experiences, very intense. You might even be weeping on one end. And you can have very, very kind of small intensity spiritual experiences. A small mindfulness moment where you appreciated your spouse or child smiling at you. It's a small moment. So, and everything in between. So we walk to walk, or you just listen. You listen just to listen, not being lost in the clutter of what we're thinking about, what we're going to say next. We're eating our food without the distractions, just the food that's in our hand, the bowl of soup in our hand. And we're, in a sense, one with the soup. We're just present to that sip. Drinking or eating just to eat or drink. Driving just to drive. Emailing just to email. So we're keeping things as simple as possible. Thankful for the mindfulness that helps us to do that. And then we connect then and have a greater chance of connecting with the sacred in that sense. So I want to invite us to pause for a moment. And let's just bring our attention to our breathing. For many people, to turn to their breathing is to turn to their spirit. like you're suddenly acknowledging, connecting with that inner spirit, giving yourself the potential to tap into the sacred that lies within you. So taking a moment to breathe, just to breathe. To feel your in-breath, to feel your out-breath, to be there for it. So that right there is simplifying your meditation, where we let go of everything else. We simplify it just to this inhale and this exhale. And then in that less cluttered space that we're creating for ourselves, we can add another layer to the meditation. And pose questions to ourselves as we explore our inner journey, our spiritual quest. We can pose universal spiritual words to see how we resonate or don't resonate, connect or don't connect with those words. So let's offer a few for practice. So as you breathe in and out, what is your still small voice saying to you? What is a universal human truth from your perspective? What does it mean for you to express virtue? How are you connected to all of life?